Welcome, everyone, to our look into history's mysteries. Today, we talk about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the seven wonders. Were they really as great as stories say, or did they even exist?
Good question. The Hanging Gardens are often seen as amazing, but they aren't in any Babylonian writings. Maybe their story is more fiction than fact. Was it ancient advertising?
That's possible. But let's look at the science. Building big gardens in a desert needed smart water systems. Ancient Mesopotamians were good at managing water. Could they have done it?
We should also think about culture. The gardens showed Babylon's wealth and power, but maybe over time, stories made them bigger, like Atlantis. Are they about wanting a perfect place, not something real?
If the gardens are just a story, what does that say about our wish to believe them? Do we like the idea that humans could beat nature? Are we not giving old engineering enough credit, or are we dreaming too much about it?
We shouldn't ignore their skills. The ziggurats of Babylon show they knew a lot about building, so maybe gardens in the air weren't impossible.
True, but as Guy said, the lack of direct evidence is important. Maybe another ancient city like Nineveh inspired the story. Did history get it wrong because memories changed?
That's a good idea. Old texts like Diodorus Siculus talk about things like aqueducts and garden steps, but no ruins in Babylon show this. It's like the pyramids in Egypt, but no plans to see.
What if we find they existed somewhere else, in a way we don't understand yet? Are we searching in the wrong place? As we think, new digs and old writings keep changing what we know. What if something new completely changes their story?
Yes, like when the Rosetta Stone helped us read Egyptian writing. What if we find something similar for the Hanging Gardens?
That would change what we know. We could use new tech like LiDAR to find underground buildings. These tools can show what's real and what's not, bringing us closer to history.
But even with tech, understanding history is a personal view. Imagine if we find something that changes how we see Babylonian skills and their ideas about the environment. Would we call them early green thinkers?
Finding the gardens would do more than prove they were real. It would make us rethink the mix of myth and history. Can we learn from their story, even if they're not real? Are we seeing our hopes in old stories, making them what we want them to be?
Maybe these wonders were never meant to be found, but to inspire us stories about reaching for big dreams.
Still, as scientists, we want real answers. History needs both ideas and proof, but we have to accept not knowing everything.
Maybe the real gift of the gardens is their story. They remind us that human success is temporary, but dreams last.
In the end, it's not about what history tells us, but what it hides, inviting us to keep exploring and dreaming. Are we making a mistake by not seeing how smart ancient builders were? Or are we trying to fit our dreams onto old stories?
It's hard to say. Ancient builders made things like the Great Bath with smart water systems. This shows they were skilled, but without proof, we're just guessing. The Hanging Gardens might be part real, part story.
Yes, exactly. We often give the ancients credit for things we find hard to understand, but they worked for many years. If the gardens were real, they needed many trials to figure out how to water them. Their strong structures were really impressive.
The culture is important, too. Stories about the gardens might show power in a perfect world. Let's not just ignore them. Maybe the myth shows Babylon's goals, even if the gardens never really existed.
What if we're not searching in the right places, or not using the right ideas? Are there old texts or things we missed that could help us?
That's an interesting thought. Think about clues from other cultures like the Assyrians. Their libraries helped learners even later on. Maybe the garden story came from many cultures' building skills.
Modern tools like radar might show hidden structures we can't see from above. We should mix new tech with the old stories to imagine what structures might have been.
By looking at both real and imaginary stories, we might connect the line between truth and myth. This might tell us how stories shape what we believe is possible. That might be the real wonder.
Whether true or not, the story of the Hanging Gardens makes us want to explore and imagine. It helps us see life not just as it was, but as it could be. Do we underestimate the skill of ancient builders? or are we just dreaming about old stories?
That's an interesting question. We should not ignore what ancient people did. Did you know the Greeks had heroes aeolipals? They were early steam engines. They did not lead to big changes, but they showed technical skill. These show amazing though rare technology.
That is why we need to look carefully. The missing proof for the Hanging Gardens does not mean they couldn't exist. Big engineering works, like Rome's aqueducts, were hard but possible with time. Making water systems in Babylon was possible.
We must also think about how stories are told in history. The gardens might have shown wealth and control over nature, like Atlantis showed a lost perfect world. These stories show our wish for perfect order, ideas that stay over time.
Are we seeing the gardens as our wishes and beliefs, not what they really were? Is our interest more about their meaning than their reality?
It could be. Stories can change or be lost over time. They might become bigger in our minds. Maybe different cultures mix stories that became the garden's story.
Even so, with new technology, we have more ways to study these mysteries. Tools like ground radar can help explore ancient places that are hidden or damaged. We should expect new discoveries.
By looking at these stories not just for what they say, we can see how human values have changed over time. Maybe the real Hanging Gardens are the stories themselves, growing with each telling, inspiring future people.
Whether real or just stories, the Hanging Gardens story lets us explore history. It challenges us to not only find our past, but to think about what we know and how stories can shape our future. As we learn about these stories, we can't ignore how myths change history. The story of the Hanging Gardens, like many others, shows us that legend and history often mix. Should we see myths as part of history or as a change in it?
Mythology can be both. Think about King Minos's labyrinth in Crete with the Minotaur story. The Minotaur might be a made-up creature, but the palace of Knossos is real. Myths often start from real places or events, but get bigger over time.
That's right, Guy. But myths might show us what a society values more than what really happened. Building big gardens takes a lot of teamwork and skill. Maybe these stories show dreams of controlling nature, like reaching for something great.
Totally. Myths often show what people dream about and who they are. The Hanging Gardens might show a perfect world or respect for nature. Even if the gardens didn't exist like the myths say, they still tell us what ancient people cared about, a world where humans and nature live together.
That's an interesting thought, Sonia. Myths shape how we see history and what society wants. As we explore, can we find hidden truths in these stories, or might we mix up history with myth?
By adding these myths to our history, we see a fuller picture of human life, even if we need to tell fact from fiction. To understand the past, we might have to see that some stories aim to inspire, not just teach.
It's interesting how some new ideas come from old myths. You might call it lucky inspiration. Mixing history with mythology can help create new things even today.
The tale of the Hanging Gardens, real or not, makes us think about how myths are more than just stories. They ask us to explore the ideas and questions they bring up. Their magic keeps a talk going between the past and now.
So by comparing myth with historical facts, we're asked to think about not only what happened, but what people dream about. Maybe the most amazing thing is storytelling, a garden of endless human imagination. When we talk about the Hanging Gardens, are we finding facts or just telling stories we want to believe?
That's a deep question, Michelle. Think about history as not just facts, but stories we imagine. The story of the gardens might mix real things and dreams. Like the lost city of Atlantis, some stories mix reality and legend.
It's important to be careful, but also keep an open mind. Science looks for real proof, but sometimes there are gaps. No remains in Babylon doesn't mean the gardens weren't there. Maybe we need to look in other places like Nineveh.
Myths like the Hanging Gardens are more than just old stories. They show what people valued and dreamed about. They show a love for nature or power. Old stories might show human hopes and change as time goes on.
Looking at these stories means seeing what is real and what we wish for. Do we like stories that match our ideas of success and beating nature?
History sometimes leaves out as much as it tells. Parts might be missing because they were destroyed or lost, like the Antikythera mechanism once lost but found again. History has its times of losing and finding again.
Interesting idea, Guy. But tools like radar help us find things and also challenge us to rethink biases. How we fit new finds into old ideas changes how we understand history.
Yes. The garden's story, real or not, questions what we think about progress. If we look at history's truths and dreams, we can learn about old hopes and maybe the future. It's always talking about what was and what could be.
Maybe the real wonder isn't if the gardens were real, but how they inspire us. By thinking about their truth, are we making our own imaginative gardens?